Welcome to another session of Studio Sessions. We're here to talk to a fascinating man about his new book on a subject which is close to my own heart, which is critical thinking. My name is Richard Sept, and I'll be your host tonight on this episode. We're with Mr. James Burns.
That's a
Thanks
pleasure.
for being on the show again. And your
Richard.
book is titled Critical Thinking Skills, the Most Dangerous Book in the World. I think that's a great title, by the way.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, I really enjoyed writing it.
What's it about?
Well, about critical thinking skills, it's about influence and the tactics of persuasion. And what happens is that we all fall prey to the tactics of persuasion. So I thought I'd put a book together that would make it so that people would have like a spiritual self-defense. You don't always see manipulation coming. You usually see it after it's happened.
Well, they usually call that propaganda.
Right. I go over propaganda, I go over marketing, I go over brainwashing, I go over just every aspect of, like, even the fact of the language you speak corrals you into a way of thinking. So I'll give you an example, is that people that speak in German and people that speak in Spanish, they assign gender to nouns, you know? So a table can be female in one language and it can be male in another language. And if you ask those native speakers to describe that table in English, where we don't assign gender to nouns, they will describe the table given the gender qualities. And so the way that we learn to speak corrals us into a way of seeing the world. And that's what I want people to realize, is that we're all under the influence all the time. And so the only way to really combat being influenced is to know you're under the influence. Because if you never think, they show that the people that don't believe they can be manipulated are actually the most easy to manipulate.
Yeah, I could really believe that, you know. In fact, there was a quote once, I remember, that said, teachers should teach how to think, not what to think.
Right.
And I've always kind of held that true myself. We have to have critical thinking skills and be able to spot this kind of BS as it's being given to us over the TV, over the internet, in our newspapers, our magazines, everywhere we go. We're inundated by people wanting us to change how we behave, what we buy, what we consume, and how we think.
Yeah, we're constantly being bombarded by slogans and images, and people are trying to corral us into their behavior that they want us, or the things that they want us to pursue, or even our own identity, is that they're telling you, you know, this will make you something. And what it is that we're emotional creatures. And so all thought starts basically with an emotion. And then you figure out the logic to fit that emotion. And what we have to do is we have to realize that others can provoke emotion in us, and it doesn't have to be valid with their argument. And so there's like flawed reasoning, is that we like to think of ourselves as reasonable human beings, but we know that when we're tired or hungry, we get cranky. And our thoughts really aren't our own. We know that if we don't feed the children on time, they will have a mental breakdown. And we also suffer that. And so what there is that there's these methods of manipulation that are being used on us. There's scenarios situations that they put us in that heighten our level of suggestibility. So like in TV shows, they used to do like the very scary part and they cut away to a commercial, because they know in that heightened level of anxiety, you're more easily suggestible. They did the studies.
Aha! I always thought it was to make sure you'd stay to watch the rest of the show and not turn to another program.
Yeah, no, it's actually a marketing technique that they knew.
That's interesting to know.
Yeah, emotion can lead to flawed reasoning because you want to believe in a conclusion without any basis to reach that, other than that's how you feel. And a lot of people have to overcome that. But in this book, it just shows the techniques that marketers use in selling us stuff. Is that this will make you like, oh, buy this because while supplies last. there's a sense of scarcity. Or buy this because a celebrity uses
endorsed
it. Yeah, endorsement. So there's all these techniques. There's a man called Robert Cialdini. He wrote a book called Influence. And in the 1984, he wrote it. And he said he couldn't sell it anywhere. And then all of a sudden, the marketers bought it. But there's the most incredible propagandist, influential person of the last century, which I write about in this book, is a man named Edward Bernays. And there's a video on YouTube you can watch. It's called Century of Self. And it really shows how he created the consumer lifestyle, the consumer culture, and how it was, he used all the tactics of influence to bring that about. And it turns out he was the double nephew of Sigmund Freud.
Ah, so there is a link.
Yeah, so Sigmund Freud's sister married Sigmund Freud's wife's brother. And I don't know how that works in the Freudian world, but they had a child, so he's a double nephew, and he is the one who actually brought Freud consciousness to the United States. He marketed it, Edward Bernays. And I talk about him in this book, but critical thinking skills is, it's called rhetoric. And it used to be taught in Greece. And Socrates taught it, and he thought, you know, everybody has to learn to question authority. And they have to learn to think is that the fast talker and the swindler and the con man can take people who don't know that they can be misled. And they can get them to believe whatever it is not in their own interest. And so Socrates taught rhetoric and the tactics of persuasion. But he believed that those tactics were so powerful, you had to teach people ethics first. You had to teach them to be a good person, then you could teach them the power of persuasion. And what happened was there was this group of teachers called sophists, and they practiced sophistry. And the wealthy families hired the sophists to teach the tactics of persuasion to their children without teaching them ethics. And Socrates was so upset that they would teach people to make like not a valid argument into the most convincing argument and not have taught them ethics first. And that was, so he was really upset about that. And it wasn't until Aristotle said, hey, look, we got to teach everybody these methods because they're going to need them for self-defense and also to promote the common good, if that's what, you know, they're doing.
Well, and that's what it takes. You have to have these abilities to spot what's being done to you and be able to critically analyze things. It's like I teach a class in film, and one of the subjects we talk about is propaganda in film. And during the Second World War, to gin up patriotism and support for the war effort, especially as it drug on to its bloody conclusion, the movies were utilized to try to get people to hate the enemy.
Right.
And
the lighting that they used, and the voiceover or the music. I mean, you know,
all the little elements.
Yeah.
And there was always, you can almost tell after a while the techniques that they were using. There was always a young farm boy soldier, and you knew he was going to get it. You know, he's going to die before the end of the film because he was too nice and too good. You know, has a little picture of his girlfriend, you know, in Kansas or what have you. And he would be the one that would be shot by the Japanese sniper.
And that's the thing about media, is that they can always choose who they want to villainize.
Yeah.
And what one of the things that my wife and I had done was we taught media literacy.
Right.
And
good subject.
Right. And so there's nothing that happens on TV by accident. It's all completely constructed. And right now, you have to learn how to construct your own media to deconstruct what other people put together. So in this new age that we're living in, the camera has replaced the pen, and the screen has replaced the paper. And so if children aren't taught to read and write in the new medium, then they fall prey to the manipulative tactics of it. So like when I watch TV, I always know that there's a thing that when I grew up, there was a thing called the moral of the story. What is the moral of the story? And I look and I see right now in the very popular shows that it's a demoralization campaign. Is that the compassionate person gets killed and the person who is selfish, they succeed. And so the value system that a lot of the popular TV shows are showing is that if you're a nice person, you think of other people, you will be punished by severely getting killed, like on The Walking Dead, or Breaking Bad is all about, let's put you in situations where you have to compromise your morals all the time, and you have to choose the bad one, that you're forced to be a bad person. But all these storylines are purposely constructed. This is not entertainment. They are selling you a value system. There is what I call writer's liberty, and there's a responsibility. We as a creature are monkey see, monkey do. We're imitative. And so our media right now doesn't reflect reality. It's leading reality. And the chaos that we're living in today is the media's fault. The media has created the world that we're living in, and that's why I wrote Critical Thinking Skills, is like people got to pull back from all the influence and start judging the morality of the writers who are putting these shows together, because if they don't reward a good person for being a good person, and they reward a bad person for being a bad person, then that's an immoral writer. And I don't care if they say they're justified, because in reality that's the way it is. Storytelling is how we hand down our values.
Well, what about the Middle Ages, where the lives of the saints were held up as example? People who literally gave of themselves all their lives, some of them heroically,
right,
and died usually for their faith as martyrs.
Critical thinking skills is all about questioning authority. And there's only one system of government in history that wants to educate its people in critical thinking skills, and that's a representative democracy. A representative democracy wants each citizen to have the skills to participate in the political arena, right?
So that's what the goal is.
Right. So if critical thinking skills is not the common core of your education system, then it is an authoritarian system. If that has been eliminated from your education system, then they're no longer worshiping democracy. What they're doing is trying to set up an authoritarian system. So one of the things that's going on right now is that people don't realize that they don't have the ability to think. They don't realize how easily they are to manipulate. Like George Carlin said, you know, symbols are for the symbol-minded. And as soon as you're gung-ho about something, you got to pull back about it and go, wait a minute, how did I get here? Who does this benefit? Who put this? Who's going to profit from me behaving this way? I mean, who manipulated me? When I started the whole book, I was like, do we exercise free will? And my answer was no.
No.
And then I read a study that said, if you convince people that they don't exercise free will, then they don't hold themselves to high moral standards. So people have to believe they exercise free will to hold themselves to higher moral standards, right? So we do exercise free will, but the only way to exercise free will is to realize how much under the influence you are of others, so that you can pick what you allow to influence you. I don't watch certain shows on TV because I don't want to be influenced by what I consider immoral writers. It may be entertaining, it may be exciting, everything like that, but I see the value system that they're promoting, and they're not promoting a value system.
But also, I think there's like a mob mentality. I had this experience at college. I was going to a class in Napoleonic history, and there was a demonstration on campus. And I was walking down the hall, and all these people came chanting, ho, ho, ho Chi Minh. They were against the war. And I was walking along, this guy said, come brother, and he linked arms with me and said, we're going to march on the administration building. And then pretty soon I found myself chanting, ho, ho, ho Chi Minh. And then the police came and shot tear gas at us. So I got tear gas, and then we all dispersed. And I thought, how stupid. My whole class was disrupted. We didn't end the Vietnam War by 1 second shorter. All the microfilm that was burned had been duplicated, so it wouldn't prevent anyone from being drafted or anything, which was supposedly the goal of it. But it gave me a great insight. I could see how in that mentality, I felt like I was 10 feet tall.
Right, that's called the bandwagon effect.
Yeah, and I felt like I could do anything. It gave me an understanding of how all those knuckleheads of Germany could go Sieg Heil to Hitler.
Yeah.
You know, you caught up in that wave of emotion, you could do things which are very immoral.
Yeah, is that in peer pressure and just, you do what your friends like and you dress like them when you're growing up, and you just realize that, when do you become a true individual? And you become a true individual when you start questioning the forces that have created who you are and are creating who you are now. And you realize that if you put yourself in a certain environment, it's going to affect you. And that's why I'm saying that that's where you exercise free will.
That to me sounds like they're limiting voices.
Right. Well, the thing is that what people don't realize is that free speech absolutism, where you allow anybody to say anything, is the slippery slope to fascism. Because what it does is it gives validity to hate speech, and people are persuasive. Now, the biggest book burning in World War II, people think was Germany when they burned all the books. But the biggest book burning was actually when the Allied forces came in and they had to burn all the Nazi books. The books that said that races were inferior to them, and they'd incorporate it into their biology books and stuff like that. And you can't allow people to put out that kind of propaganda. Propaganda is influencing. And if people are immersed in it, but I'm saying that you don't have to burn it if everybody had critical thinking skills, but if people don't have critical thinking skills.
But that's certainly not what we want. So we have to sometimes listen to people we don't agree with, and in fact hate, rather than muzzle all speech.
Right. What I would rather do is that when I wrote this book about critical thinking skills, I could talk to anybody about how propaganda works and persuasion works, and that way I get into the mechanics of thought, and I don't have to talk about the content of belief. No. So I can say, oh, this is the methods that are used to persuade people, and Republicans would go, that's what Hillary's people are doing, that's what Hillary's doing. And then I'd say the same exact thing to the Hillary people, and they'd be like, that's what Trump's people are doing. And the thing is what I wanted them to all realize that is there's tactics. So there's a thing called assault on character. I can assault your character. I can start putting you down, make you feel small and stuff like that. And then I could say, but there's an ability for you to redeem yourself, that you can now join the party and you'll be somebody. And so there's what's going on right now is that it's a morale problem. There's a demoralization campaign going on in the population, and that I talk about that. It's the main core of psyops. Is to demoralize a population, to get them infighting, to get them not to believe that there's going to be a better future. And it's a mindset, it's a worldview, and I know that if people think critically, I call it the most dangerous book in the world, because if you learn these tactics, you can manipulate other people, and everybody falls prey. I've written the book, and I fall prey to it. Flawed reasoning, false equivalence, straw man. I mean, when I read the list of fallacies that were there, some of those were my go-to arguments. I was just like, oh, because I have emotion and I want myself to be right, and I'm willing to bend logic to make it right. But the one thing I really figured out is that we're all really metaphorically vulnerable. Is that I can say, that all chickens are like frying pans, and like frying pans, we got to put them on the fire, and just some crazy metaphor. And what a metaphor does is that it shows that there's a parallel truth between two things. But then you can exaggerate that and start applying it to other things. When you start to analyze the language, then you can analyze how we communicate. And when you analyze how we communicate, because we're all the same. That's the whole thing. It all comes down, we're all the same. We're all going to have to work together to make the world a better place. And the sooner we do that, the sooner the world becomes better.
One thing I've learned as a historian is the people who built the pyramids or the castles in the Middle Ages, they were all the same kind of critters we are.
Right.
And they still thought the same way. The only thing that separates us is we have more toys than they did in the past, and more opportunity too.
Well, there's some people that think, why does this happen? Why is this happening? And there's other people who's like, how did it happen? How is it happening? And I think as a society, it's really important that we realize what people's passion are, and then we cultivate. I think motivation is the flame that we have to preserve. You see a child that just wants to sing, well, you can teach them so much off of singing. We're living in an overlap. There's an old age coming to an end, and there's a new age that's coming into being. And so what I call it is the wave of the future, and there's the undertow of the past. And the wave of the future is going to be where the world comes together, that humanity becomes a positive influence on the planet, that we actually aren't hurting the environment, we're helping the environment, and that's what brings about the turnaround. And that the past was we were exploiting the environment and we're all fighting each other. And I see the new social media, and I see that old tactics is every generation is starting from scratch. That's the problem, is that old people take their wisdom to the grave. And the young person's born going, I don't know what's going on. And so we have to teach people how to think and how vulnerable they are to the influence of others. I got to use the tactics of persuasion and influence to convince people to learn the tactics of persuasion and influence.
The good news is if everyone knows these, they'll be also inoculated against propaganda or against uncritical thinking. And if people are critical thinkers, that'll make them better human beings, or at least we hope.
Yeah, and what it does is that it makes media consumption, because we're consuming so much media, a lot more fun. And when you get someone else who can analyze something, like you did film studies and things like that, I mean, it's fascinating to sit around in a discussion after you've seen a movie and go, wow, the use of shadows, wow, the use of music, wow, that voiceover at that moment really impacted me.
Yeah, the subplotting, everything of that nature. It makes the world far more texture to it.
Right.
So I think that is an important part.
You're participating on a mental plane of the construction of the world around you. Because like if you can't read and write media, if you can't use a camera and edit and take apart media and deconstruct what others have put together, then all you can do is watch it. And when you watch it, you are a sitting duck. And most people are just watching media and not analyzing the media they are. So when they sit there and they go, I just tune out and I watch the show, or you know, I mean, you just look at the media, the shows. In the 1950s, they decided to like make shows where the good guy always wins.
Yeah, that was the...
right. And I say I'm a victim of 70s TV, because 70s TV says, you know, the bad person can turn it around at the end and be a good person by the end of the show, right? And then in my life, I found, you know, that's not really true. Right?
Really. Yeah, the bad person usually remains bad.
Right. But the thing is that the bad person also gets their comeuppance in that they're isolated or all they have. I mean, there's reward in being good.
But that's not the case. Many times bad people end up being rich and powerful.
Right, but you know what? It's not, spiritually, it's nowhere to be. I mean, I'm trying to get life satisfaction. There's people who get their wires crossed. There's a thing called a helper's high. When you hold the door for somebody, there's a self-reward that you get for it, whether they thank you or not. I call it baking your own cake. But there's other people who've had personal trauma, and they get a herder's high. There's people who want to hold the door, and there's people who want to slam your fingers in the door.
Yeah.
And the herder's high is the sadist. And it's the true evil. And you know, sometimes people have grown up under a sadistic parent or a sadistic sibling and stuff like that.
Or a sadistic system.
Right. And it's changed them in that they don't trust everybody, and they know that there's all these bad people and stuff like that. And there's other people who've grown up in a thing where everybody has been loving and giving around them. I mean, we got to look at, like, you know, what kind of human beings are we developing with the experiences that they're being given. Now, critical thinking skills is one of those things that everybody, it's kind of a manual to your mind.
Well, what about today with the internet and all that, everything going on out there in the cyber world? There's both good, bad, and who knows what.
Right.
What are we making? The kids who are being inundated in a world where it's all computers and Facebook and stuff like that. What will this next generation be like?
Well, the one thing that we have, the true currency in life is time. Time is all you have to spend, and that's why they pay you per hour, right? Okay, so when I made my children time conscious. I said, look, when you are young, your brain is fresh, and you can learn things twice as fast as me. If I practice guitar for an hour, you can be as good as I am in a half hour. And so then I said, and there's three things you can do with your time. You can waste your time, where you didn't enjoy it, you have nothing to show for it. You can spend your time where you enjoy it, and then you can invest your time where you have something to show for it. And investing your time, like you know, with my children, I said, like, look, let's invest in language.
Yeah,
let's invest in musical
language.
Instruments, right? Because those are the things that you carry with you for the rest of your life. Wherever you go in the world, you can speak those languages. Wherever you go in the world, you can play those instruments like that. Now, our education system is wasting our children's time, and they're not teaching kids qualities. I mean, even sports is like, I played Little League and was good and did sports and stuff like that, but I still don't do that, where it'd have been better if school would have had me learn an instrument, because I'd probably still be playing it. But I didn't get that. I didn't learn another language either. What if we took, right now, what if we took all the children in the world and we taught them 3 languages as in sign language?
Well, in Europe, that's a common thing where everyone knows at least 2 or 3 languages.
Right, and imagine the new ability of expression these human beings would have. Can you imagine in the future that everybody knew sign languages and 3 languages, so that they combined all the vocabulary of that and they talked with their hands? I mean, we'd be an animated species.
Then the problem with that is, what should say happen if, and it is happening, it's no prediction here, it's really, mega languages are destroying older languages wholesale. There are languages vanishing from the face of the earth, and it's only about 5 languages dominate. Hindustani, English, French, Spanish, it's a big one, still dominating. Portuguese, but just a handful.
Right, you can teach these languages. When we had a daughter and we moved to Mexico, and she learned Spanish in 6 months. But the truth is that because we went down to Mexico, we found out she was good at languages, and she actually just graduated in linguistics. She speaks 5 languages, 2 sign languages.
Great.
But we would have never known that if we'd have stayed in the United States.
I think that all of us have a lot of talents we don't know anything about. We in our subconscious, wherever, and only when they're properly stimulated does that skill come forward. And hers, it was language.
Right, and the thing is that everybody's born with a passion, and it's for our job to find out what that passion is and then cultivate it, so that then they can figure out how to apply it to the greater humanity. Everybody wants to be part of something bigger than themselves. Everybody wants to be a hero. Everybody wants to be part of it. You see, little kids are so helpful. I say with my little kids that they want to be helpful until they are capable of being helpful, and then they don't want to be helpful anymore. But you see it as a young person, that they want to do the dishes when they can't do the dishes, and then they won't do the dishes when they can do the dishes. But that impulse has to be, you know, we all want the approval of others.
Right.
We all, and critical thinking skills is that there are people out there who will manipulate you. So, okay, if somebody makes you feel bad, the thing is that I say, don't focus on feeling bad. Focus on the tactic that was used to make you feel bad about yourself, and that pulls you out of the whole thing. Now, that's called an assault on character. So when somebody assaults your character,
having been a person who has been assaulted, having my personality, my character assaulted by people whom I didn't even know, it's really hard to do that, to intellectualize. It's an emotional response.
It is.
And it's a blow,
right,
psychologically as much as physically.
Right.
You know, so if you have something like that happen, it's very hard to overcome that reaction. So it's difficult.
Well,
for
like
people to
one
do
of the
that.
tactics that people don't realize that persuasion is face screaming. Okay, when someone gets in your personal space, they call it up in your grill now, and they scream in your face like a drill sergeant. Yeah. That is a tactic to like undress you, they call it. And the thing is that why does the drill sergeant do that? Because he does that in front of all the other people. And so you have to watch out with face screaming, is that it changes your neural network. And so there's tactics in cult indoctrination. They deprive you of sleep, and they deprive you of protein, and then they can get you to believe things that you would have never believed in literally your right mind.
Well, in the case of the drill sergeant, they want to break you down to a point that when he tells you to go attack the machine gun nest, which is suicidal, you'll do it. Instead of saying, well, you know, I don't think I want to attack that machine gun nest.
But in truth,
but they want you to
right.
do whatever they tell you to do.
Well, in truth, the guy that gets face screamed, they don't care about that person. They're just destroying that person as a human being. It's everybody who witnesses it that fears having their self face screamed. That guy who got face screamed, that's why there's such high suicide rates after basic training when they've never even seen any combat. And that was Est. There was Est would scream in people's face. I call it that it's an assassination that they do in front of everybody to scare the bejesus out of people. And so you have to
part of the whole system that they're developing.
And that's what we have in the media, is that we are like, they'll show you violent shows. It doesn't make you violent, but it makes you more afraid of the world. See, you got to see what the tactic is and what the response is, and once you have it, then while it's happening, you're caught up in it. But it's only later, if you have critical thinking skills, you go, wait a minute, I'm experiencing severe emotion here. What brought it on?
I know that the media does this a great deal. Fear is a great seller of products and everything else. You see it on security systems, you know, showing someone breaking into your home or smashing your windows or what have you. Or you see it in so many different ways. People want to use the fear of the enemy at the gate. They're going to come in and do horrible things, so we must fight them.
There's
give up everything.
There's incredible studies. There's the Milgram study of getting people to electrically shock someone for getting the wrong answer, and the authority that then, why do they do it? The problem is that, like, I tell you to do something immoral, and you go do it because I told you to do it, and what you've done is you've abandoned your moral agency. And the thing is that if someone tells you to do something that's wrong and you do it, it's on you. It's not on the person, right? But if you do what's immoral because someone told you, authority told you, it was your job to do it and stuff like that, then it's on you. And that's another thing that the authority doesn't want you to know with critical thinking skills, is you never abandon your moral agency. You are what you do no matter who made you or told you to do it. I mean, this book is the most dangerous book in the world because it'll make you a master manipulator, but it also gives you the tactics not to be manipulated. And the problem is that the people who need it to not be manipulated won't read it, but the ones that want to be master manipulators will read this, and these tactics work. I raised all my kids on critical thinking skills. I always say I raised all my kids on psych ops because I want them to be safe in the world. And you have to read a book like Critical Thinking Skills, the most dangerous book in the world, to have those tactics not only in your tool belt, but also on your shield.
Yeah, and that's what we need more and more of to protect ourselves. And that's what I found so fascinating about that study, is not that the Nazis were horrible people that did terrible things, which they did, but the fact that they were so normal.
Right.
And that deep within us, if the right person pushes the right button, we could do that too.
Right. But they didn't have critical thinking skills. If they had critical thinking skills,
the last thing that the Nazis wanted was anyone in their empire to exhibit anything like this.
Hitler's tactics, he wrote it all out in Mein Kampf, and I condensed it down, and I show exactly in one chapter all the tactics that Hitler used. And you know, he was a genius of propaganda. He was an evil, evil person. But the fact is that he knew how to manipulate people. And you know, some people have had such a bad childhood that they learn to lie and they learn to manipulate to survive. And then they come out of there and it's really up to their heart whether they become a good person or not. And that's what you got to watch out for, is that it's easy to identify the sociopath because they start with the poor me. They prey on your sympathy. So the person tells you, oh, I got this problem and all that problem and stuff like that. And they try it on every single person. And some people are like, oh, I see the tactic. But there's other people that are like, oh no, they're really having a hard time. And that person, they go in for the kill.
I know exactly what you mean. I call such people professional victims.
Right.
And they always come to you saying, someone screwed me over, and they describe the scenario. And then, of course, your natural reaction is to help them.
Right.
Well, that was terrible what happened to you.
Natural
Here,
reaction.
I'll help you. And I've gotten into cases where you get involved with such a person, and wouldn't you know it, you now become the new abuser.
Right.
They blame you for all of their problems, and they tell the next person, oh, that person, you abuse them. So they use that tactic over and over again throughout life. But
yeah, so this book is basically mental mechanics.
Mental mechanics.
Yeah,
good
it shows
term
how
for
our
it.
mind, and then that way it doesn't go over like the content of your beliefs. It goes over why you think the way you think and your vulnerabilities of why you think that way.
And in Nazi Germany, which is the best example of this sort of behavior, they got together some German soldiers. They weren't SS or anything, and they said, "Oh, we're going to this village and kill all these Jewish people." And this one guy raised his hand and said, "Wait, that's illegal."
Right.
Even by German law, it was illegal. You can't just shoot people. And he said, "Yeah, you're right. You're excused."
Yeah.
And they sent him off. They didn't kill him or anything, but there were people, even in a closed society like that, where violence was exemplified, who opposed it, even in that society. And I'm sure we have people out here today who would object to an immoral order.
Yes.
Like in Vietnam, where people were massacred.
Well, in that Milgram study of the people shocking people for getting the wrong answer, and a person in a doctor's jacket telling them to do that, there were people who refused to do it, and they never studied those people. They only studied the people who did it. And the people who refused to do it, they called them exemplars. And they'd never have done a study of what makes up the character of an exemplar.
And there are
And that's
people out
interesting.
there.
That's why we don't have critical thinking skills in our schools either.
And there are so many, especially if you study the Holocaust, so many people who were not Jewish, were not German, or maybe some were German actually, who gave themselves and risked their lives to save Jews.
Right.
Children, one lady hid them under her skirt and put them in a bag
Yeah.
and carried them out of the Warsaw Ghetto, risking her own life to do so. And so there are people out there. It's nice to know that there are still a few saints who wouldn't go along with the crowd, go along with
This
the
is the most
passion of
dangerous
moment.
book in the world, because this is how to be an
This
exemplar.
tells you how to be that way. That's a great book.
Yeah.
I think you really highlighted a need we have in our modern society to understand what propaganda is doing to us.
Yes.
Now, how can people get a copy of your book?
They can Google Critical Thinking Skills, James Burns, or The Most Dangerous Book in the World.
It sounds like a really important message to get out to the public so they can learn how to defend themselves against the horrors of propaganda or groupthink or whatever you want to call it.
You can't really be your own person until you know how to be your own person. You know, otherwise you're just going with the bandwagon effect. You know, you're just falling prey to all the methods of manipulation. It's too easy. I do it all the time myself. I realize I do things and I'm like, oh man, I'm reciting a specific slogan because, or I'm feeling a certain way. You know, because I saw the commercial, you know.
Yeah, and they're designed for that. The cute little dog, you know, in the cage, trembling in fear, to get you to give money to some cause. Very powerful images on TV, especially, and the media and the computer are very good at using images like that to compel you to do something or think the way you think. Such as recently the picture of children in little cages, dog cages. Who would allow that to happen? And it did strike a chord.
Right.
And cause people to react.
Yeah, and a lot of things are staged, and a lot of things are real and then downplayed, you know, and yeah, the methods are being used like all the time. Everybody in their communication, every time you're trying to convince anybody of anything, you're using a tactic. And the tactic that you're using, you can find in that book.
My father said something when I was, during the Cold War, and he said, you know, we were talking about Russia and communism and things of that nature. And I said, well, yeah, their Pravda is all 100% propaganda. He said, no, it isn't, because if it was 100%, no one would read it. It's only 80% propaganda.
Right.
And I said, okay, well, maybe they throw a little truth in it. He said, yeah, and the American media, it's 30% of that's propaganda. And of course, I had been propagandized to think everything American is good.
Right.
And everything.
Why would they lie to me?
Yeah, why would they? They're good Americans.
Right.
And then I had to think about it, and I realized he was right.
Well, we're becoming disillusioned, but think about that. We're no longer illusioned.
Yeah, the illusion has become the reality.
Right, but the thing is, I think that we can pull out of this, and that's why, you know, I have real hope for humanity. We were smart enough to get ourselves into this mess. We should be smart enough to get ourselves out of this mess.
Well, the good news is we never blew each other up in the Cold War. Wiser heads prevailed.
Yep.
Although we almost did a few times. And so I hope that the wiser heads will prevail and will come out of this experience with a new world, age of Aquarius, who knows? And we'll look back in the future at our time and say how stupid those people were to believe the way we do.
I hope we, in the next few decades, I hope we look back and just go, whoa, that was close. Just pull back from the edge and make things happen. And I think the first step down that road is going to be thinking about how we think. You know,
it's fascinating how we can be talked into believing things. Well, this concludes another episode of Studio Sessions with author, writer, philosopher James Burns. Thank you very much for coming on, explaining your book on critical thinking skills. We all need them. This concludes another episode of Studio Sessions, where we're lucky to have with us a great writer and thinker, James Burns. And stay tuned as we explore more topics and different fascinating subjects on future episodes of Studio Sessions. Until then, Richard Sept signing off.